those of you who don't know me, my name is Timirah James. I am a developer advocate at a company called Cloudinary. I'll explain what we do in just a second, but I wanted to do this workshop because, SwiftUI, first of all, was going to push me to learn SwiftUI. Those of you who don't know, SwiftUI was just born this year. So, everybody, it's the hot new thing that everybody is talking about. And, this is kind of my way of pushing myself to learn it as well. So we're just going to go through some fundamentals to get everybody just in the gist of getting started in their own minds. And yeah, you can ask me questions afterwards. All right? Cool. Oh, that's my Twitter too. You can follow me on Twitter at Timirah J. Yeah. Okay, so next one. There we go. So Cloudinary, for those of you who don't know what we do, it is media management end-to-end, right? So we do everything from media storage to media manipulation. So you can, it's kind of like a back-end as a service situation. So you're able to manipulate media assets, for example, add on accessibility features such as captioning, translation, background removal for videos and images as well, resizing, all of the above, as well as delivery. We also have a developer program that we just launched called the Media Developer Experts. So if anybody is doing anything cool or wants to learn anything cool as it pertains to handling media, or designing or anything to do with performance when it comes to mobile applications, accessibility, anything of that nature, come speak to me and we'll get you up and going. Who am I? Yes. So I came here from Los Angeles. I work remote in Los Angeles in the States. I'm an iOS engineer. I spent most of my career as an iOS engineer. And before I crossed over into developer evangelism, or as they call me, a developer advocate as well. So what that means is I do a lot of talks like this. I do a lot of meetups, community things like that, hackathons, all the fun stuff, right? So glad to be here. Also the founder of a group called TechniGal LA, and basically we teach girls of all ages how to code, and then for those who are not necessarily coders, just introducing them and exposing them to different opportunities in tech. So whether you want to be in music, whether you want to be a teacher, whether you want to be a lawyer, a designer, there are opportunities in tech, and we expose them to those things. Also, might have caught your eye, I'm a singer-songwriter as well, and actually have a song about code, okay? And it is on Spotify. It's called Coderitis. All right, so if we have a little bit of time, I might let you hear like 10 seconds of it. Okay, and again, follow me on Twitter at Timirah J. If anything stands out to you, I'm looking for quotables, I'm looking for photos, all of the above. I will retweet, follow you, all of the above. And let's take a selfie afterwards. All right, good enough. All right, now, what is SwiftUI? So basically, it's a popular new framework released with iOS 13, and it's used to create user interfaces in Swift. So it's a new declarative framework, and everybody is super, super excited about it. And basically, for one, there's two major elements to it. So you can create your user interface with code, just build it with code, less code at that. And then there's this kind of reactive like canvas that you can see and work alongside of as well. And they kind of work interchangeably, and I'll go into that a little bit later too. What's so exciting? Easy to port iOS apps to other macOS and tvOS and watchOS platforms. So I mean, that's really a huge deal for those of us who are usually native, iOS developers, don't really build for other platforms, and don't really like to think about, other things that have to do with, kind of building out different elements when it comes to, the other operating systems. And again, less code, less code, less code. Okay. So it's so exciting. What could go wrong? So for one, if you're building with, if you're building for any operating system or any device that's not on iOS 13 or later, you can't use SwiftUI. Okay. And also, it's in early development. So, of course, what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the early days, and when Swift was just being born, and everybody was so excited about it. And then you had some people who were like super hesitant. It was like, oh, what if it breaks all my things? And so yeah, so it's early in development, and it actually is pretty buggy when you get to using it. You'll find that there are some glitches that happen, things that appear on the canvas, and things that don't quite align with what shows on the canvas versus what's on the simulator. So there are some consistent bugs that are happening, but for the most part, I mean, just as an introduction as a whole, it's pretty useful. The compatibility situation is a huge deal, though, because a lot of companies are not going to be using this right away because they don't want to break all their things. And usually when you're building something, you want to at least have something that's stable for at least two versions back. Okay, so what about UIKit? Okay, is this a replacement for UIKit? Is this the new thing? Is this Apple trying to tell us that, we need to start winding UIKit down? Or I mean, should I even start thinking about this? UIKit is still strong. It's still great. It's stable. And again, it reminds me again of the days of Swift when it was just being born. And people were like, what about Objective-C? Like, what's happening? Like, do I need to stop learning it? Do I know, what's happening? But basically the gist is, I think it's pretty safe to predict that ultimately UIKit might become less and less popular, just as Objective-C has. And again, not right away because people don't want to start breaking their products, don't want to start breaking things, right? So it's good for SwiftUI is good for projects and just playing around as far as trying to get used to it right now. But things when you're trying to build something out for production, especially for you have a lot of users, yeah. But UIKit is going to be around, so not right away. It's not gonna. SwiftUI is not going to replace it right away. But yeah, we should definitely expect the popularity of SwiftUI to increase over the next 2 to 3 years, but not totally replacing UIKit. So yeah, so I would suggest that you continue to use both frameworks. Okay. So before I jump into anything, most people are asking. I took a survey kind of before I did the talk, and most people are asking, what are is it differences in the data types, and is the terminology the same? It's kind of the same gist, right? And I'm like, yeah, sort of, but you want to make sure that you're getting used to seeing a lot of these things that we use, seeing them in this light, right? So UI view controller, it's just view, okay? Which can be confusing because you're like, okay, am I talking about UI view? No. In Swift, when we make a reference to a view, it's an entire view controller, okay? Same with a table view. Not a table view controller, but a table view is just known as a list. Navigation controller, navigation view. Alert controller, alert. Label is just text. Now that can throw you off too, because you're like, okay, I usually do, label.text or some. No, but now we're in this space of like, okay, now I have to know that a label is actually just referred to as text. UI image view, image, and so on and so forth. I do want to point out also at the bottom the stack view, right? So stack view became popular recently too with Swift, and now there's another version of a stack view, and it's basically called stacks. Okay, and there's different versions for each of the layouts for each stack view. So for UI stack view horizontal, it's HStack. Vertical, VStack. And then there's another one called ZStack that we're going to go over as well. So terminology alone is important to just get, and because it can definitely throw you off. You're like, wait a minute, text? Am I talking about? Okay, cool. So just a rundown. We're going to go over views first. Okay, creating and combining views, layouts. We're going to go over state variables. And then we're going to touch briefly on dynamic lists. All right. Are we ready? We ready? Okay, I know you're ready for food, but are you ready to learn? Okay, here we go. Creating, combining views. Here we go. One thing I wanted to point out is once you do update, right? You update Xcode and blah, blah, blah. When you are building for with SwiftUI, it's a whole different navigation. You have a whole new set of files here, right? So you have the app delegate, you have the scene delegate, and then you have this content view, right? So this is where we're going to be handling our view controller. This is the main, this is equivalent to when you start off with an initial view controller when we open Xcode, right? So it's just content view here. So this is where we're going to be focusing on. Okay, so here's the deal with content view. So just disclaimer, this is a screenshot from raywinderlich.com. I couldn't upgrade my operating system on my work computer, so I can use Catalina. So I wasn't able to, so you have to have Catalina in order to view this canvas, right? So I took a screenshot. So what we're seeing here is the ContentView.swift file. And what I want you to note is that basically the content view is only destined to return one view, okay? So this text element right here, that's one view right there, okay? And we can't, if we wanted to add something else, we have to we have to build on top of that. And I'll show you exactly what that means, right? But basically, content view is only destined to return a single view. So here are our stacks that I was talking about. So we have HStack, which is horizontal, VStack, which is vertical, and the ZStack that I was referring to refers to depth or overlay, right? So for instance, and I'll walk you through the example, if you have an image and you want to have text, overlaying text or something to that degree. If you have like a card view, you want to do something crazy with an animation, one from the other, you have to use the ZStack, okay? So this is our initial content view. That's what we started with. All right, just hello world. Okay. So basically, if we wanted to do, if we wanted to just say, okay, we want to put another view, right? We have to define how we want that view arranged. Okay, so this is what I meant by it's only meant to display one view, right? Every other view has to be defined, right? How do you want it arranged? Where do you want it? How do you want it? And this is something that we can actually respect as iOS developers. It's like, okay, this is something that we can define. This is something that we can see immediately. So right here, we're saying, hey, we want this displayed vertically, right? So one text, this is not a text view, but one view on top of the other, okay? So this is a more complex situation, right? So what if we wanted to use all of the views, all of the stacks? We can do that. We can use multiple, right? So for instance, for this here, we have in our vertical stack, right? We have the image, and then we have horizontally, right? We're aligning the text that we have here, right? Then we're giving it some color. There's a foreground color, and that's also an attribute as well. Background color, foreground color of text, and drawing borders. But basically, and then there's a spacer right there. So basically, there's no like, even when you have the alignment here, as we would with like auto layout, or like when we're defining auto layout programmatically, we would have like the spacing and all of that. Actually, there's a whole other element as a spacer. Okay, so it can get confusing a little bit, but once you get the gist of it, it can be pretty cool. ZStack. Okay, so in our ZStack, like I said, it's an overlay. So for example, oh, I didn't do it. For example, I have a image of a Polish pen, little button, and I have my text overlaid, right? And notice I have the text, the view, over top, underneath, in order to say, hey, I want this displayed over top. Okay, so everything's about arrangements, right? All of these things matter. How you write it, where is it arranged, and you don't have to think of these things yourself. Like this canvas is super, super helpful and super reactive as well. And I'll get into that in a second. Now, this is just to show you an attribute here. We got the color is red. Okay, we have the background color red. So what this should have done, if my slide would have worked how it should have been, this should have a background color. This text should have a background color of red. Okay, so let's just pretend it's there. Okay, it does work. So yes, so basically this is saying, okay, now I have my Polish pen. I want my text to be over top of that, and then I want my background color to be red, okay, of the text. So super simple, right? Now we have this alignment that I was talking about. So again, just as if we were defining our layout programmatically, on a regular scale, we have the leading alignment, right? But there's no spacing. So if I wanted to do another, text, right? Another text, I would have to add another spacer there, right? So it's a spacer element. So it's a whole other like object. Okay. So yeah. So there's this leading. So now you can see it's over there to the left. So I just want to get you used to like the syntax and seeing what it would look like. So as I said, you don't have to like always, and this is really cool when it comes to, just based off the fact that SwiftUI is super new. Everyone is still kind of learning it, getting the gist, but also it's just super helpful. It saves so much time, right? So there's this Swift inspector, so you can click inside. So everything's being updated, as you are programming, right? But then you can click on an element, right? So I want to click on this text, and if I want to arrange it straight from this Swift inspector, I can right click. If I wanted to do that, I'm able to do that as well. I'm able to do that straight from the canvas. Okay, you can embed in a group, embed in a button. There's so many different things and layers to this Swift inspector. So it updates in your code as well. Okay, so it doesn't just update here on the canvas. It updates and places the code where it needs to be. Okay. So let's move on to state variables. So when we talk about state, right, what's the purpose of state when it comes to SwiftUI? Basically, state, the purpose of it is to maintain consistency between the state and the UI of your app. Okay? So for example, adding, and I'm going to play this. All right. So basically, it's just a counter, right? So if any of you have, played around with Flutter or anything, like the initial application, the initial counter. Okay, so this is something similar. So what we have here is we have a state which is storing a value, right? It's storing the initial state, right? And what it does is it monitors as well as updates the state of your UI. Okay, the state of your variable, and it updates the UI for you. So basically, you got some eyes and ears, and that's your state. Okay. So for example, our state property would be, number of times clicked. We have a vertical stack. We have the text here. We have our button right underneath. And basically, there's just a counter. There's just a counting happening, +1. Okay. Wish this video was working. But yeah, so this is just to get the gist. So now we have basically an observer that is listening out for when a state is being updated, right? So if you think of it like if you had a Boolean, a true or false value, right? You have something listening to that and updating your UI accordingly, right? So you're not writing a separate function outside of that, right? You're not even writing an if-else or anything like, or a switch statement or anything like that. You just store the state here, and it's watching for you, and it's updating as well. All right. Now, binding views. All right. So basically, what's the benefit of binding views? Basically, you want to pass a state to multiple views. What does this mean? What does this mean? Pass a state to multiple views, right? So if I need to watch for something, watch for a status of something, and I have one view that's depending on that state. What if I have a view that has maybe some child views that also depend on that state, right? So for example, you have some type of form, login situation, right? So you have, your text views, your text fields, you have your buttons, you have, your authentication. You have all of this depending on the state or whether this user is logged in, right? So the state could be logged in or logged off. Okay, so all of these views are watching for that, and it's updating accordingly, updating that UI accordingly. So it can go to the next view, it can go to the next phase of the application, or it can maybe, I don't know, if it's the wrong password, it can be like an alert view or something like that. But that state is basically at the top of that hierarchy, and it's storing that value and is watching for any changes and updating your UI accordingly. So it's really important. Yeah, so here's a good visual, right? So state watching one view, and the state is watching multiple views, right? Or a better visualization would be so there's one big view, and then there's these like child views inside. Okay, so state is basically an example of a property wrapper that is, has been presented by SwiftUI. So AtState is basically if you need to, you need a simple property that belongs to a single view. Okay. Another one that is, I guess, second popular when it comes to usage, as second popular as it can be because everything's very new. If you need to have a complex property that may belong to multiple views, okay? Then you have at environment, right? You might not see this a lot, but if you need to have a property that needs to use all around views, okay? Okay, so dynamic lists. Here is where my application wanted to, not application, where Xcode wanted to kind of, mess up on me. So I was safe, and I took some screenshots from my boy Paul Hudson, very good friend of mine, Hacking with Swift. And he has a really good example of what dynamic lists look like, or building a dynamic list look like. So remember what I said a list is, right? What's the equivalent of a list? A list is, right? In UIKit, what is it? It's a table view, okay? So it's basically a table view. So it's the equivalent of you building out a table view, right? So you have this one view, and basically you're building out the list, right? So the first cell, or the first element in your list would be, let's say you have an object, restaurant, and it has a property name. You give it a name, and essentially that will show up as the title or the subtitle, right? And then the second as well. And then there's an array here. So you put that into an array. Here, you're returning it here. And basically, this is how the list is built. Okay, so it's very, very different from if you were to use if you were to build it out in UIKit. First of all, even if you were to build this with there's no storyboard here. Because this would even be easy using storyboard, right? So if you're used to using storyboard, if you're used to just using UIKit, you don't see the protocols here for UI table view or UI table view controller. So there's a lot that's being kind of stripped down. Okay, and so basically this is where Apple is going. Like this is the direction, right? So again, I keep making this reference from Objective-C to Swift, right? So it's so similar, this new birth of SwiftUI, because we always used to say, oh my gosh, Objective-C is so verbose, like all this like boilerplate stuff and blah blah blah, and Swift is so clean, and so it's so concise and legible, and so much less code. And then here comes UIKit. UIKit is great, and then SwiftUI is basically a lesser version of that, meaning it's much cleaner, much more defined, right? And our brains are probably already used to spelling everything out, defining everything as it goes, maybe redefining some things, making sure, there's a structure that we're used to. And basically, Apple with SwiftUI, they're kind of clearing us of that structure and basically stripping us of over half of that, half of what we would use in order to accomplish these things. So yeah, this is basically the pattern with Apple. Okay. Okay. First of all, that was a lot. Okay, it was a little, but it was a lot. We barely scratched the surface, right? But in terms of new terminology, getting used to this new kind of syntax in terms of how a project is even initialized, or again, redefining how you build a structure of like a table view, or or even just a view. Defining what exactly is a view. Now text is, if you want to define text, now that is seen as a view. Also a view is defined as a view controller. Like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on. So, even that alone, getting used to the syntax, and just this new pattern, it's just a lot to digest at once. And that's why I guess, we have the canvas there to help us. We've got, there actually isn't a lot of resources, like educational resources. It's so new, but again, people are still scared to touch it because at this point, it's not stable, it's not mature, the community is not big enough. And again, you want to build safely for at least and consider users that are at least 2 versions behind. So yeah, so it's pretty tough. So let's think back, okay? So for one, there's some advantages. A lot less code. A lot less code. We have this like canvas that's like can do things for us, and even if we don't know where to arrange things, we can actually tell the canvas to do it for us in the code. So we can use that interchangeably, right? So we can have the code define the UI, have the UI define the code, right? So really a really reactive relationship right there, right? Amazing. Also, just having to, again, relearn all this terminology. Relearn all this terminology and, really digest it, as we're so used to, like, UIKit is like our go-to. There's really no replacement for UIKit. For years, this has been our go-to, when, defining anything in terms of our UIs. So this is really, this is something really, really new. And yeah, there's just so much to learn. But again, if you dive in, just know that you're one of the early adopters, and keep in mind that this is something that is considered the future, right? This is considered progressive, right? So even with all the disadvantages and all the, maybe, slight learning curves, like, you're ahead of the curve by learning now. Okay, so in the next 1 to 3 years, you'll see, just as Swift has become more and more dominant, and will become more and more dominant as Objective-C becomes less and less popular and maybe deprecated in the future. But don't want to speak of that. But yeah, I can see the same situation happening here. So you definitely want to get on it now, because when it comes, you'll basically be an expert, an early expert. As I mentioned, there's not a lot of resources, but Apple has done a great job of including so many example projects, great example projects, starter projects in the documentation when it comes to SwiftUI. They've done, this is probably one of the better rollouts of docs when it comes to SwiftUI that Apple has done. And then AppCoda, I believe I used a reference from appcoda.com. They do great tutorials. my good friend Paul Hudson, hackingwithswift.com. And if you follow him, he actually does 100 Days of Swift. And then I believe he just started the 100 Days of SwiftUI as well. So if you want to follow that hashtag, um, if you want to, look more into that, he's doing tutorials every day. Again, there's not a lot of resources on SwiftUI, so whatever you can find, and then whatever you're learning, make sure you're sharing those things as well. And then, of course, raywinderlich.com. Actually just joined the video team at raywinderlich.com. So you'll be seeing a course or two from me soon. And yeah, but he's already got some great stuff on SwiftUI. And yeah, let's see. Thank you so much.